Hey guys, welcome to history class. History lesson 35, Isolationism and Imperialism. So we're going to talk about those two terms and how what part they play in American history. Um, let's do a little bit of current events before we get started. So I'm sure you guys have heard by now the new policy for coronavirus. They've discovered there was just a big discovery that happened today, that coronavirus is actually being passed around by meat consumption, by eating meat, and somehow it's gotten into all kinds of different meat products. So the government is ordering a ban on eating meat, and we're going to all have to become vegans for the next 30 days. April Fools, I got some of you, maybe not all of you. But anyway, just kidding. No vegan stuff. You can keep eating meat. By the way, I was looking, and there are a whole bunch of people that want to cancel April Fool's Day today because they're afraid of. I think it's because they're afraid that it's going to be insensitive to people that are struggling with the coronavirus, and I get that. I mean, I know we need to be careful, but I'm like, really? I mean, we also need to maintain our sense of humor and make the most out of this. So I have no problem with doing April Fools today, as long as people are careful, of course. Anyway, yeah, as far as the coronavirus is concerned, we talked about it some yesterday that the social distancing has been extended to the end of April. Um, I'm not sure what status is with schools and so on, but it's looking like it's not going away anytime soon. We'll see. We'll see if we can actually get back together. There was the Dr. Fauci, I think his name is, that Trump has appointed as kind of the big shot to take care of this thing, is predicting anywhere from 100 to 200,000 people die. So that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. Now it's not, it's not millions and millions like some people are predicting. And who knows? Even he says he doesn't really know. He's just kind of guessing. He's probably guessing high, but again, we just don't know. But hang in there. Wash your hands. Yeah, don't get too close to your friends. I know you girls like to do your little hugs and stuff. That's okay. Keep doing that. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Anyway, let's do some review. So last lesson was about feminism. So who can tell me some of the problems in feminism? Undermining God's design for female rules, failure to see the beauty of genuine Christ-honoring femininity, false accusations and the stereotyping of men, sexual immorality, abortion, and transgenderism. Those are some of the negatives, some of the big problems, and they are big problems that came from feminism. There's a lot about feminism that is not healthy for our culture. Feminism did have some legit concerns. Who can tell me what they were or what they are? They are concerned about violence against women and the objectification of women. Very good, those of you that did it. By the way, you should have your notebook open, right, to where we stopped last time. What characterizes fourth wave feminism? The Me Too movement and equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity. So again, equality of outcome is when feminists feel that they should have, on average, be making just as much money as men, be appointed to the same positions as men, and so on. That's equality of outcome. By the way, I'm not sure if I talked about this in the last lesson or not, but that only applies to certain things, right? So In politics, women want to be elected just as much as men, but you don't hear of women wanting to be plumbers, right? Somewhere I read or heard that I think 98 or 99% of plumbers are men. So if women really want equality, they should want to be plumbers just as much as they want to be politicians, right? Anyway. Third wave feminism started in the 1990s, ended in the early 2000s. What were some of the characteristics of third wave feminism? Sexual liberation, transgenderism, but they also shared many of the same characteristics as the second wave feminism. What were some of the characteristics of second wave feminism? Domestic violence, women in the workplace, and reproductive rights, which usually when somebody is talking about reproductive rights, they're talking about abortion. First wave feminism started in approximately, oh boy, I think I have my pages all messed up and out of order. Okay, started in the 1830s, lasted till the 1900s, and they were concerned with women's suffrage, which basically means they wanted the right to vote. Okay, so shifting gears and talking about foreign policy in the United States. So initially when the United States was founded, we were not too concerned about expanding or empire building, as you might say. We were pretty content to just kind of be our own nation and have our country and just be who we were, right? And so there's two terms we need to talk about. One is isolationism and the other is imperialism. So let's first of all, let's define imperialism. Imperialism is a policy or ideology of extending a country's rule over foreign nations. Okay, so that's going out, conquering other nations, or maybe not even always necessarily just conquering them, but using whatever power, whatever means you have to try to manipulate and control them and get them to do what you want them to do. That's imperialism, and it can be done in a lot of different ways. The other one is isolationism. Isolationism is the policy or doctrine of isolating one's country from the affairs of other nations. I'll give you a little minute to see those. So imperialism, a policy or ideology of extending a country's rule over foreign nations. Isolationism is the policy or doctrine of isolating one's country from other nations. So these are two kind of opposite foreign policy ideologies. Okay? Now, in the United States, we tended to be more isolationist up until the late 1800s, the end of the 19th century. back when the United States was formed, we did not approve of the imperialism of France and England. We got away from, we were wanting to separate ourselves from England and be different from them. Remember, that was what the revolution was all about. And we resented their imperialistic tendencies, their tendency to go out, conquer other people, and subject them to their rule. So Americans did not like European imperialism. And so we tended to be very isolationist, with a bit of a caveat. Because if you think about it, we still, in a sense, were a bit imperialistic in the way we conquered the West, right? The United States kept expanding and expanding. So remember Manifest Destiny. That was the belief that Americans had that it was God's ordained will that they would stretch from sea to shining sea. So what were the nations that were conquered in the process of colonizing or moving from the east to the west? You could argue that the Native Americans were the nations that America had to conquer. So there is a sense in which there was a bit of an imperialistic spirit in westward expansion as well. But again, the Americans didn't see it that way. They saw that as, that's part of our destiny, that's part of who we are. And so they were mainly focused not on going out and sailing the seven seas and conquering different places and building their empire. They weren't really focused on that. They were focused on expanding where they were. And they were content with that until basically the job was done, right? Once we had conquered, the mainland North America, or not mainland North America, mainland United States, as it is today, that's when our policies sort of began to change away from isolationism and become more imperialistic. So why would a country become imperialistic? What are the interests that drive this? One of the interests is business. So there's the bigger you get, the more business opportunities there are, right? And if you do business in foreign nations, then you become concerned about the politics and what's going on in those nations. So let's say you're a British dude, you're a rich British guy, and you have lots of money, and you don't know what to do with it. Sorry. Anyway, so you decide to invest in an American oil company in Wyoming or something. There's this big oil company that's doing a bunch of fracking and exploration, and they're poised to become the next big oil business. And so you invest money in them. If you did that, if you're a rich British dude and you invest money in an American company, are you concerned about whether or not Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders becomes the next president? Should that concern you? Yeah, it should, right? Because if Donald Trump gets reelected, he's going to continue to try to help the oil businesses thrive. He's going to deregulate those industries so that they can keep growing. But if Bernie Sanders gets elected, he's going to put in place all kinds of regulations and all kinds of policies, or he's going to try to anyway, try to put in place policies and regulations that are going to slow the growth of those companies. So as a British investor, you are going to be concerned about that. But the thing is, you can't do anything about it, right? You're not an American citizen. You can't vote. But if enough people in a country are doing business in another country, and there's enough of a vested interest in the business of that country, then that country is going to be tempted to get involved in the affairs of the country that they have invested in to try to manipulate and or control the political things that happen. And America has done this. America has been guilty of this. So that's one thing, business. has an effect on foreign policy. Another one is military. So the strengthening, the buildup of our military also plays a big part in foreign policy decisions. So this led to, throughout the 1800s, the United States annexed several territories. Okay? Does anybody want to guess what those territories might have been? A hint? 2 of them are now states. You got it? Alaska. So in the mid-1800s, there was this guy named William Seward, who I think was the Secretary of State, and so he negotiated to buy Alaska from the Russians for, I want to say like $7 million or 14, I can't remember, several $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money to us, but when you do the math, it came out to about 2 cents an acre. Alaska is roughly 1/5 of the size of the entire United States. So with one purchase, we added 1/5 of our size to our country, which is pretty significant. There was no bloodshed, no war. We just bought it from Russia, and we got Alaska. Now there's a lot of people that are like, "You're crazy. You're wasting your money. Alaska's they called it Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox because Alaska's, what is it? A bunch of mountains and glaciers and that's it. Hans is like, well, we can hunt, Yeah, but what else does it got? Right? Does it got anything else of value to us? Actually, it really does. It has a lot of things that are extremely valuable to Americans. Initially, we didn't know this, but the attitude toward William Seward changed when we discovered what in Alaska? Gold. Okay? Alaska is loaded with natural resources. So there was gold that was discovered in Alaska. Alaska is full of natural reserves of oil. It's just full of natural resources. It's a very, very valuable part of our nation. It also has a strategic military purpose. Why do you think Alaska is important militarily? Who can we keep an eye on from Alaska? Any idea? Yes, Canada. You have to keep an eye on Canada. You never know when Canada is going to rise up and try to take us down. I'm kidding, not Canada. April Fool's again. Not Canada. We don't have to worry about Canada. Okay? Canada's great. We have to keep an eye on the Russians. Russia is one of our biggest foreign policy challenges. You never know what Vladimir Putin is up to over there. He's secretive. He does all this stuff, and we always have to keep an eye on him. There was rumors, I think, a year or two ago that there's this big, huge, massive internet cable that goes across the Pacific Ocean that connects us to other nations and stuff. And it's extremely important. Like if something happened to that internet cable, my understanding is it could disrupt a lot of things. It could cause major issues. The rumor was that there was a Russian submarine that was getting a little bit too close to that internet cable or something. Anyway, another thing to worry about, right? No. But anyway, we always have to keep an eye on the Russians. So Alaska plays an important role. It plays an important role both economically and militarily. Hawaii, of course, is the other one. Now, Alaska was purchased from Russia in 1867. So let's write that down. And Hawaii was annexed in 1900. Now, that they did not become states. They didn't officially become states until 1959. They were territories territories previous to that. But they were annexed. They were, purchased. Alaska was purchased in 1867. Hawaii was annexed in 1900. So yeah, there's several important parts that these places play. So both military, they have military and economic purposes. Okay, military and economic advantages. Hawaii has. What does Hawaii have? What is the the really important? What's the word? I'm trying to think of how to word this. Part of our military that is stationed at Hawaii, that's a very important strategic base. What is it called? Who can tell me? Pearl Harbor. Yes, Pearl Harbor, which was bombed in World War II. That was a huge setback for the Americans. Thankfully, we were able to recover from that, but it was a very, very strategic battle that we lost, and it set us back and made World War II much more difficult. Another thing that Hawaii had before, I don't know how much of this is going on anymore, but was big-time sugar plantations. So that was the industry that kind of led to Hawaii becoming part of the United States. Hawaii was populated by native Hawaiians for the most part, but a lot of Americans and foreigners had moved there. There were missionaries that had gone and tried to convert them, and a lot of them actually, I think, had a lot of them had converted to Christianity. But anyway, there was Americans there, and the Americans were the ones that were running the sugar plantations and building the big businesses. So the natives were the weaker people, and slowly the foreigners, including Americans, began to get more and more power, and eventually they overthrew the Hawaiian government and set up their own republic. And then they asked America to annex them, to make them part of America. Initially, one of the presidents, I think it was McKinley, I can't remember which one of them said, no, I'm not doing that. But the next president came along and said, sure, we'll annex you, and that's what they did. Some other territories that the United States annexed throughout the 1800s were the following. Countries like Midway, Guam, a country called Wake Island, Johnston Islands, see that? I think so. American Samoa, yeah. Now these were territories that the United States annexed. There were some others that they did too, but the reason I wrote these down, these were strategic military outposts. Well, actually naval outposts, because as you know, this is before airplanes. So you had your troops, your land soldiers, and then you had your navy. And the United States was building up its navy. They eventually became one of the biggest navies. They had the biggest navy in the world. And so to kind of help with that, they annexed these other territories so they could put naval bases on them, which are places basically where ships can, well, they can park them there, but they can also refuel there as they're sailing to different places. So it's very strategic and very helpful when it comes to your defense systems and so forth. So yeah, these are, and some of these territories we still have. I'm not sure about Guam. I know we still have American Samoa. Remember, that was the one that where I can't remember, one of the politicians got like, oh yeah, it was the guy from New York. I can't think of his name. Anyway, he got like one electoral vote from American Samoa. I don't know if you remember. We talked about American Samoa is one of the territories of the United States. All right, we're going to talk a bit about the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War erupted over tensions in Cuba. Spain owned Cuba. They were ruling Cuba, but they weren't very kind to the Cubans. They oppressed them a lot. The Cubans were not treated well. There was a lot of sugar plantations, and the people who worked on the sugar plantations lived in very bad, very poor conditions. The Americans began to have sympathy for these people and began to pressure Spain to give them more freedom and so forth. And so Spain started to do that. But anyway, there was this tension. And at one point, President McKinley sent a ship, the USS Maine, to Cuba. For some reason, it was supposed to be like a friendly connection or whatever. And the ship was sitting there in the Cuban harbor, and one day it just blew up, exploded. And of course, immediately the Americans blamed Spain. They said Spain just blew our ship up. This is an aggressive act of violence. We need to retaliate. We need to have war. McKinley did not want war, and many people felt like maybe it wasn't even the Spaniards that did it. And today, a lot of people think that it probably was not. What probably actually happened is that somehow the explosives that were on the ship caught fire and they exploded themselves. Anyway, but this eventually led to the Spanish-American War, where we went down to Cuba, and Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders and all of that happened during this time. But there wasn't just violence in Cuba; it was many different places in the Philippines and throughout the world. The results of the Spanish-American War is that numerous nations were liberated from Spain and annexed by the U.S. So several places, several different countries, Spain lost and the U.S. took them in. Okay, so liberated from Spain, annexed by U.S. And what were these nations? The main ones were Cuba, and we're going to write partially because the United States never completely annexed Cuba and never completely took control of Cuba. They just kind of took partial control of them, but let them have their own rule to a certain degree. Eventually, they gained their freedom. I'm not sure exactly how, and eventually became a communist country under Fidel Castro and became one of our greatest threats because of their connection to the USSR and so forth. But initially we did have a certain amount of control, but we didn't completely take control. Another one was the Philippines. And this is one of the more sad elements of American history. When we took control of the Philippines, we became very oppressive toward the Philippine people. The Philippines fought alongside us to get their freedom from Spain. They helped us fight against Spain with the understanding that once we won, we would give them autonomy, we would give them freedom, we would give them their own country. When we won, we didn't do that. We took them as our own and made them our country and controlled them. And they hated that, and they resisted that, and they fought for their freedom for years and years and years. And according to our textbook, 250,000 Philippines died in the process of trying to get their freedom from the Americans. And the Americans treated the Philippines very badly. They treated them, they developed a mentality that they were lesser or inferior people, and they burned villages and just did some very, very bad things. So there's a lot of these are the kind of things you often don't hear about when you talk about American history. America is guilty of some of the same things that other countries have been guilty of. So it's a sad situation, but our history in the Philippines is not great. So we're going to put resentment and war resulted from our annexing the Philippine Islands. Another one that we took was Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is a current U.S. territory. Fun fact, Mrs. Weaver and I have never gone on a trip to like any tropical place. Like we've always, when we go somewhere, like when we went on our honeymoon, we went to Canada. When we go out, we just go somewhere in the mountains. We've never gone to a tropical place. Like most people on their honeymoons, they go to like some exotic island or something. We've never done that. But recently we've been talking about going to Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is a beautiful place. It has beautiful beaches and nice, just a lot of nice touristy type stuff there. And one of the reasons why we want to go to Puerto Rico is because Puerto Rico is still part of the United States. It's not a state, it's a territory. So when you go there, you don't have to get a passport. It's just a lot easier. So anyway, fun fact. One of the positive elements of the Spanish-American War. So these are kind of some of the negative. Puerto Rico, I'm not sure. By the way, sorry, Puerto Rico is spelled with an O, not an A. So those of you that saw that, I'm sorry. Spelled with an O, not an A. Yeah. One of the positive elements of the Spanish-American War, this happened right around the turn of the century, right around the beginning of the 1900s. Okay? So what was the last big conflict that the United States has been involved in? The Civil War, right? The last really big war that the U.S. has played a part in was a war amongst themselves. The war that tore our country apart. So the next big war that we fight in is the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish-American War, to a certain degree, reunified the North and the South. Because once again, we were fighting together for a common purpose instead of fighting against each other. So that was maybe one of the positive elements. Reunification of North and South. So again, but this is the United States moving away from isolationism and becoming more imperialistic, starting to become more concerned about going out and getting involved in other countries instead of just focusing on ourselves. Another element of becoming more imperialistic is the Panama Canal. So as the United States builds its navy, it begins spreading out around the world and putting naval outposts at different places around the world, in the Philippines, Guam, all these different places. One thing that becomes very important is to have a naval passage where you can cross North and South America. Again, and we've talked about this, but the big problem about North and South America from a naval point of view, from a trade point of view, from an exploration point of view, is that you can't get past these two continents in the water. You have to sail. The only way to get around them on a ship is to sail around the southern tip of South America, which is way, way down there. And there's no waterway, there's no water passage that crosses North or South America. But there's one little place between North and South America in Central America, this little country called Panama. That's the tiniest and smallest sliver of land between the two oceans. So that becomes the place where it appears anyway that it's going to be the easiest to actually make a canal where you can cross. So Teddy Roosevelt is a very, he was one of those, let's get it done type of guys. So he, at the time, Panama was owned by Colombia, which is, I think, the northernmost nation in South America, I believe. Anyway, they were owned by Colombia. So Teddy Roosevelt offers Colombia, let's see, I think it was like $10 million. $10 million and then $250,000 of rent per year to build the Panama Canal. Now again, sounds like a lot of money to us. Back then, by today's terms, when it comes to that kind of thing, that it's not that much, but back then it probably was a fairly significant amount of money as well. The Colombians say, thank you, but no thank you. We have no interest in helping you build your canal, Mr. Teddy Roosevelt. So bug off, right? And this makes Mr. Roosevelt irritated. He doesn't like this. He's the kind of guy, he doesn't like it when he can't get something done. So what does he do? He gets this rumor circulating, and I'm not exactly sure how he does it, but he puts this idea out there, and he gets this rumor out there that if Panama revolts against Colombia, he will help them. Okay? And so that's exactly what happens. Panama gets wind of this rumor that if we revolt against Colombia, evidently they don't like Colombia, and they want to be free from them. If we do that, Teddy Bear is going to help us. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. Panama revolts against Colombia. Teddy Roosevelt sends ships to protect the Panama people from the Colombians, and he helps them win their freedom. And then he immediately strikes a deal with them and pays them the exact amount that he was going to pay Colombia to build the Panama Canal. So Colombia, not only did they lose Panama, but they lost the deal. They don't get any of the money. Now, eventually later, I think a later administration ended up paying them like $25 million or something for the whole deal to kind of make them happy. But Colombia, ever since then, well, at least for many years after that, Colombia resented the United States, probably for good reason. So the Panama Canal is it was a major project. They had to figure out ways to. Malaria was a big deal. So when you're down in those jungles in Central and South America, the mosquito. They had figured out that mosquitoes carry malaria from place to place. And so they had this guy go in and drain the swamps to get rid of the mosquitoes. So they had to do that first before they could go in. And it was just this, it was a major, major undertaking. And a lot of the land was above sea level. So they had to make locks where, I'm not going to explain it, but basically this big locks where the ships go in, they fill up with water, and you lift them up, and you go to the next one. And anyway, you can look it up on the internet. It's pretty cool. So the Panama Canal is completed in 1914. And this has a major impact on water transportation. Major impact on water transportation. So ships are able to avoid an 8,000-mile trek all the way down under the southern tip of South America to get where they're going. That's huge. That's huge. To be able to save 8,000 miles on your trip makes a big difference. So it had a big impact. So again, these are things that happen, and this isn't the only thing throughout. Ever since about 1900, even up until, to a certain degree, to present day, America has meddled in other people's affairs, and it has come with mixed results. we have gotten a lot of good out of it. So the Panama Canal, again, having military and naval bases at different parts of the world, that has been very helpful to us. The natural resources and things that we get from various places are helpful to us. However, with almost every time that we have meddled in other nations' affairs, it's mixed results. And many times those nations themselves come to resent us because of what we do. Sometimes they like it. There are some countries that we go and we annex and we kind of take control of them, and they have been glad for that. Sometimes they're initially glad, but later they resent it. So there's just all kinds of mixed results from that. But again, I'm of the opinion that the more you kind of stick to yourself and keep your patties out of other people's affairs, the better off that you are. But I'm not the president, so I don't get to make those calls. Anyway, so let's just jot down American imperialism. Has had mixed results. And one of those results is that it often leads to the perception of being a bully. Okay? Often led to the perception of being a bully. And again, not entirely, those accusations are not entirely unfounded. We have done some things to other nations to get things from them that are not good. So, but that's kind of the transition that happens. And today we have politicians that fight about, should we get involved in other countries? Sometimes we do it to help those countries. But usually even when we do that, there's often something that we get out of it. So it's one of those debates that comes up often. And it's not necessarily just a Republican-Democrat thing. There are people within the Republican Party that are more isolationist, and people who in the Republican Party that are more imperialistic. So it's something that our country has to try to decide what's the right thing to do. Not, unfortunately, we shouldn't just be asking what's in it for us. We should be asking, is this the right thing to do? Okay. Anyway, read chapter 24 in Changing Frontiers. Part of your homework. Don't forget to put your comments in for class participation. See ya.